Although French-Canadian films, they watch their own films.
I know.
Why? Why are French Canadians watching their own films? They're under the same government system that rewards you for doing Canadian films.
Yeah. I think a big part of it is language, obviously.
Yeah, but why aren't they? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
but then
part
why
of
aren't
it.
they watching only French blockbusters? Is that an oxymoron?
No. Won't come back up. I don't know. I think with the French, they've almost been, and even before, like defending themselves from sort of like American culturalism, imperialism, they've always been like so self-deterministic about their sovereignty within Canada and sort of preserving their heritage and culture that just like manifests itself in terms of like a defense from.
And they also don't cater. They don't cater to American audiences. So we don't have that weird thing that we do here, which is kind of has to be commercial. You know, like when Stursberg was running Telefilm, and he was like, you know, we have to get 5% box off. It's got to be commercial. But in order to get any development funding, it has to have Canadian, sort of some kind of nationalist Canadian content. So you're doing this weird Canadian nationalist commercial film, which is why they did a film about geese.
Just to take it back to Zed, can you talk a bit about the sort of evolution of that program and what sort of your approach was and what need you guys felt you were fulfilling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing with Zed is Zed was I would say what CBC was in the 60s. Like, TV came about in the 50s, CBC came up around then, and they were the experimental box because nobody knew what the hell they were doing. Nobody knew what TV could do. So if you look at old CBC footage, and which we actually played on Zed, there's a bunch of guys on LSD literally just sort of riffing, and they're talking about fishing, but there's no fishing, there's no fish. They're talking about the fish they're high, but there's this whole experimental thing. Like, it's fantastic. There's interviews with oh my god, black guy guitar player, Jimi Hendrix. There's like amazing interviews with George Foreman, with all this stuff that they were doing in the 60s, but like they're all these stoned guys asking the questions. Like, all the interviews they're funky, they're neat, they're like all over the place. You're like, is everybody high in the 60s? But yeah, they were. So then I think Zed got inspired by the time of, like, can we stretch television? Can we bring this convergence that was happening, right, in the 90s? So the whole vision was to have a distribution channel, which lived on the web, that would feed into the TV show, and the TV show would feed the distribution channel. It was way ahead of its time.
I was gonna say,
Way, when people were just starting to talk about convergence. And there was nothing like that. Like, there were, even in Europe and in the States, there was nothing like that. So CBC was cutting edge. You know, and they gave us money. Like, they actually gave us a budget to do it. And we were under the radar because it was after 11 o'clock, and they were like, nobody's watching after 11 o'clock. So it was great. They were like, go do whatever you need to do. And I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think they got an envelope from the government in terms of diversity. So there was a real push to have Zed be diverse. So there was a lot of, you didn't have to have your regular television people, because people were coming from online media, pairing them with your traditional television people, which wasn't always a happy marriage, right?
Yeah.
But it was a creative one. So then they got together and they did, and then all of a sudden, you know, you have short films, you have novelists, you have bands that I'd never heard of because they never had
performance pieces.
Do you remember
that? Yeah.
Like, bands that you never hear unless you were listening to an obscure radio station, local radio station that was playing that band. I had never heard of half those Canadian bands. So, and you had these wicked music videos from these Canadian bands. It got Emmy nominated. Zed was an Emmy nominated show because of its whole web component. And all of a sudden there was an outlet. Like, all of a sudden, and not just an outlet, but a convergence of artists. Canadian artists. So even though it wasn't flag waving like we were talking about, there was a web space and a TV space and a real space for artists to come together. So, like, when I was doing all of those interviews, I was shocked, right? About, you know, the throat singer going on and none of it, and the I called them the weaker thens. With the weather cans? Yeah. And I did it on air. Yeah, it wasn't so good.
I still would have called them the weekend.
Would you call them the weekend?
So I'm glad you corrected that for me, just in case we randomly end up interviewing them.
Yeah, it was good.